And welcome back to another Between the Pages book chat. And today our guest is author John Dyer, who's here to talk about his sci-fi series, The Anye Legacy. And it's basically, as he describes it, lemurs in space, which sounds really cool. So I'm going to turn it over to him and let him introduce himself. So take it away.
Well, how do you do? Glad to be here, and thank you for having me on your broadcast. Um, the whole series started, I guess it was back in 1982. I had a strange dream that lasted about 15 seconds, and I'm sure writers can resonate with this. I woke up thinking, what's that about? And so over the next couple of years, I sort of daydreamed a scenario, kind of a story behind the dream, and that's what turned into these books, which is now originally conceived of it as a 9 book series, and it's still 9 books, but it's I broke it out into 3 trilogies because there are 3 sort of major sections in the master arc of the narrative. So the first 3 books are the Anye Legacy books, and the second 3 books, our working title is the Anye Migration, and the third trilogy is called Ajavati. And so it starts with an alien race, 3 million light years from Earth, 70,000 years ago from modern times, and they are stalled in their industrial age, and so they're sitting about where we are right now technologically, only they've been stewing in this pot for more than 1,000 years without moving forward. So they're stalled at the edge of space. They have orbital manufacturing, but they're still using rockets and space planes to get to orbit. And they haven't discovered all the things that we are kind of hoping for in our future. You know, everybody talks about flying cars and jetpacks and anti gravity and unlimited free power, and they don't have these things. And so that's kind of the place where the story starts off in the book Illusion of Gravity. And these people they're a furry race, but in their history, they looked pretty much like us until they had a population crisis. And they tried to solve the population crisis by gene tailoring. And in the process, rolled their evolution back 1 million years. And so within a couple of years of the carrier virus transmitting the gene tailoring instructions, gets loose and runs through the whole population, they start to have furry babies with claws and fangs. And so that's how we end up with a lemur race. And it's kind of funny because when I started conceiving this whole idea, I really wasn't planning on having an alien race that looks so much different from us. But you know, when you're cooking up a story, you try to come up with existential threats, and so I thought of population crisis because there are so many cliches in the genre, and I didn't want to overuse one of the favorites, which is supernova. And I didn't want to be dark and pessimistic, so I didn't want apocalyptic war or those kind of ideas to provide that sort of springboard for conflict and tension in the story. So I came up with population crisis, and then I thought, well, what would they do to solve the population crisis? And that kind of transpired to, well, the lemurs in the trees aren't having trouble making babies, so maybe if we wake up that genetic part in our own selves, we will become fertile again, and it kind of snowballed from there. So at any rate, the book, and I started writing as an activity. You know, I was retired, and I was looking for a creative outlet that didn't fill my life with objects. My mother was a fine artist, and she was very good at it. And her house was full of easels and paint and canvases and drawing tablets, and it filled 4 dumpsters when she died. And we had 50 beautiful oil paintings left over after everybody in the family took what they wanted, and eventually we had to basically give all that away. And I thought, well, I really don't want my senior days to be like that, for my house to be crammed to the gills. And so I took up writing, and and then uh, really with the second most recent novel, Albert, um, I took a look at the work and listened to what people were telling me about what I was writing, and I decided that perhaps it deserved an audience, because honestly, I didn't have very big expectations as to how popular my work might be. It's really writing for my own pleasure, writing from inspiration, not writing to market. I didn't need to. I didn't need another job. I didn't need to make another living at it. But Albert's a pretty good book, and it's received a lot of encouragement from people, and they thought, why aren't you better known? Why aren't you selling books? And we try to explain. You and I are in the indie publishing business, and you know how hard it is to be discovered and to have
Yeah.
people find out about you. It's 40,000 books published every day worldwide. That's an awful lot of content, and it's hard to kind of pop up. And so I really wasn't counting on it, but I was going to the effort as if I was really going to market. So I spent about a year and a half on every book, and I really put a lot of myself into it, and I try to stake out my own territory in the genre. I've been reading science fiction since I was 14 years old, and
Okay, we seem to have lost you. Okay, we've lost the connection there for a few little bit. We'll just wait and see if he comes back. Okay, we have a frozen guest. Okay, we seem to have a temporary internet, and there he is dropped off. Well, we'll see. Wait and see if he comes back. Oh yeah, I'm doing fine, Shannon, and I'm right now. I'm editing my Fairy Tales and Nightmares book, so I hope to get that out, and the second Hayward and Anderson story. And I'm also sort of fiddling around with the paranormal cozy romance, no, not romance, paranormal cozy mystery, sorry, book. So, yeah, this is when I'm answering the question, in case anybody's wondering. Okay, so I'm going to shoot him an email and see what's going on. Oh, wait, we have him back. Yes. Okay. And he's back. Yeah, there we
we're
go.
back. Yeah, it's
Yeah.
somewhere between me. It was somewhere between me and you. Anyway, I was rambling on. And I did one of these interviews about a month ago, and it was 45 minutes long. And they said, "Tell us a little bit about yourself." And I talked nonstop for 45 minutes. The host didn't get a word in edgewise. What would you like to ask me?
Actually, I like that sort of a guess. It makes my job so much easier.
Because I don't have any problem talk. I'm a computer scientist by training, right? So I'm an expressive analytical, which is kind of rare, and I will talk your ear off. I will. So anyway, where was I? Got so excited messing with our
Well,
internet
you were
connection.
talking about your book. We'll move on to the second question, and that is, tell us about your main characters. I think you do a different main character for each of the books in the first series, correct?
Well, yeah, and so yeah, there's a different main character, and the main character in the first book is Rivan Saraf, and he was think of it as a Coast Guard rescue swimmer as a young man, and then he gets out of the military and goes to college to become a physicist. And so that's how the book starts. You know, they're stalled in their industrial age, and they haven't discovered the secrets of the universe. He's in a physics program on the planet Vidura, and his mentor, the head of the department, is knocking at the door of the mysteries of space, time, and matter. And so together they solve the equations, and they have a terrible accident. They accidentally release energy from a sample of neon gas, and it pretty much destroys the science building at the university. But he and his fellow students escape, and that's how the story starts. And there's a adversarial nation state that has spies deployed and is always trying to figure out what his part of the planet are up to, and they have to run from them. And so that begins the main momentum of the story, the main conflict, and the sense of danger, and it kind of goes from there. But one of the things I guess I need to say about the series is, and I say it a lot in my essays, is that I'm not writing ray guns and rocket ships. And I talked to a fellow named Ashley Manning, who read a couple of my books and wrote reviews. And on the last book, Ashley, on the book Elbert, Ashley came out and said that an awful lot of the book was family drama. And it's really hard to be objective and look at your writing and understand what it is that you're doing. And you sort of depend on the readers to really tell you what resonates with them and what they see in your writing. And that was the first time that anybody had ever said that to me. And then I go back and look at the books, and I understand that really it's adventure first, then it's drama, and in some cases family drama. Okay, and it's science fiction and strange worlds and unusual settings last. So it's all story and not so much spectacle. Although, the technology and the speculative fiction side of it is part of the fun of science fiction. And so there's plenty of it in there for the science fiction enthusiasts. But really, all of these books really fit more under the category of literary science fiction. And so I'm really struggling a little bit to explain the value proposition here, because there aren't too many authors that do that. I can only think of a handful. William Gibson comes to mind. People mention Andy Weir and David Anthony Doerr and David Mitchell. But and to be honest, I haven't gone and read these gentlemen's works to see if that's a fair comparison or not.
Well, I think the core of any story in sci-fi, especially, is is character. So, I mean, I think the family and the family drama, whatever, works well with a science fiction novel.
Well, and my stories are very much character driven.
Yeah. So, I mean, you might not attract the hard science fiction fans who like the technology and the science part of it, but the people who tend to more towards the space opera and the lighter sci-fi would probably enjoy it quite a bit. So,
yeah. Well, and if of course you try and go through the Amazon algorithms and try and learn how to sell your books through the Amazon channel, that's a lot of thinking. I mean, you really have to look deep into what it is that you have to offer the marketplace, and then figure out how to tell people that it's there. And so that's sort of what I'm struggling with right now.
Oh, I think we all struggle with that.
Yeah.
Okay, so what is the hardest scene or type of scene that you wrote in the series?
The most difficult scene to write?
Yeah, or the type of scene to write in the series.
Oh gosh, I would say it's because it's the books are so much about life and relationships, and I try to be as authentic as possible in that, because really an underlying theme in my books is about what it takes to become a whole person and create a successful life. Okay, and and it's about the things that happen to you in your life that you have to deal with. And romance is one of those things: bonding, pairing, coupling, joining with other people, managing family relationships in general. And so writing intimate scenes that I don't want to write furry porn. Okay, so but at the same time, you got to recognize that eros and intimacy is part of life, and that you can't really fully develop the relationships between people that are courting in your stories without recognizing that. So kind of treading that line between being lurid and being honest is, I think, probably one of the most difficult things for me. And sometimes I'll make a scene just a little too racy, and then I'll realize, well, I still want to be able to call this a book suitable for young adult readers. And because I'm 73 years old, so and I've had a successful life. And so one of the things that old men try to do when they become storytellers is tell other people how that's done, and so uh, there are, I think, lessons kind of hidden in my stories for the younger reader. That's about, you don't really shouldn't listen to the voice in your head that says, why should I have to fill in something that a grown up does to create a successful life? You want to silence that head, because the really important things are not accomplished without struggle. And an awful lot of success in life is just showing up and doing what you said you were going to do, and being consistent. And an awful lot of very dull things, and not very exciting. And going to bed at 9 and getting up at 5, so that you're ready at 7 when you've got to show up at the job. All those kind of ordinary, mundane things
Yeah.
are so much more important than a lot of people understand. And so the heroes in my stories succeed without magic swords. They succeed by showing up, and by making hard choices, choices that they don't necessarily want to make, because life is kind of like that. And if you're going to win, um, you have to do really a whole lot more of that than you would like to. But that's just how things are. And so, you know, uh, and I talk about this with some reservation, because I'm not preachy about it. I'm not trying to publish a how to be a grown-up manifesto. I'm trying to write entertaining, exciting stories, stories interesting, stories that are memorable, scenes that people might think about the next day, and tell their friends and say, "Wow, he did this thing where the 15-year-old is dating this girl who's a lemur, and they're and she says to him, well, I don't like the kissing. The kissing is weird for me. And she's telling this to the human boy, and and I wrote that scene with a lot of, I think, tenderness and feeling. And I went back and read it the other day, just because you flip through your books and you say, well, should I go back and do a second edition? Would this book be any better? And I dropped on that scene, and I read it, and I thought, wow, this is actually pretty good. I don't know if anybody, and it made me wonder if I should write a short story about these two characters, development of their relationship. Because when you're editing, well, the book Albert is 76,000 words long. The excised document, stuff that I cut out of the book, is 53,000 words. Okay,
Wow.
so Yeah. So, I go and write like crazy, right? And I end up with this huge manuscript. And then I go back and I apply writer's craft to it. And I do the things that seasoned authors and best-selling authors and famous authors tell us newbies that we should do, and which is, among other things, is you look at every passage, you look at every chapter, and you say, who cares? Is this moving the plot forward? Am I doing a self-indulgent side trip here? And if so, it goes, right? And
Yeah.
so I did a lot of that, and I got rid of a lot of material that I was frankly in love with. But in the analysis, when I looked at it and said, this really is not part of the central story. I took a side jaunt and it didn't go anywhere. And even though it's lovely, it's got to go because the book's got to come in under 85,000 words anyway. And I don't want, it's hard enough when you've got a cast of about a dozen people, because the common fiction book has maybe four, maybe cast members and a straight line story arc. Well, I keep doing, that's dull for me, and so my books are generally, I have more than one mini arc running in the main story, and then I kind of bring them together and then split them back apart as you go along. So if you're going to do that, you've got to be careful about how many people you include in a conversation, because you don't want to lose the reader. You don't want to confuse them. Your attribution needs to be carefully constructed. You've got to do a lot of storycraft in order to make the book readable. But at the same time, it seems like there's like little mini stories in these books, particularly in Albert, where we have this. You have a situation where in Albert that's revealed, which is actually the seventh book of the 9-book series. So I skipped the middle trilogy. So I wrote books 1, 2, 3, then I skipped 4, 5, and 6, and I started with 7. And the reason I did that was to try and grow an audience, because when you hit book 7, you're on Earth in 1928, and everybody's got easy to pronounce names, and all the settings are familiar, and the places are familiar. And what you're dealing with now is a 25,000 year secret history of the Earth, where aliens have been here all along and running shops and farms and factories and right under our noses without us knowing about it. And so the beginning of Albert is the fairy lady shows up at Dr. Albert Holland Harrison's door in Black Rock, South Dakota in 1928, and he's 83 years old, and she knocks on the door, and she says, "I'm from the Sasquatch Chamber of Commerce. Can I tell you about our bake sale?" And that's basically how the story starts. And all of a sudden, he is in on the big secret, and that sort of launches. That's your inciting event. That launches the whole narrative about how did that happen? How did the Anye keep their presence a secret for so long? And of course, it wasn't a secret. They were our ancient gods. They're documented on the hieroglyphs and the temples and the pyramids in Egypt. And they are, the Norse gods, and they're the Greek gods, and they're the Roman gods. And we knew all about them. They just went into hiding around the time of Jesus, and we forgot. They burned down the temple, the library at Alexandria, which had the only hard evidence of their presence. And then 2,000 years later, we've just completely forgotten about them, and here they are all along. So I'm not sure where I was going with this, but it's a big story. The 9 books, it's a very big story. There's kind of a large cast. There's casts that spill over from one book to the other, but like you go from Illusion of Gravity to Quantum Soul, and you've got a new focus cast in Quantum Soul. Then you go from Quantum Soul to Resilient, and again, it's a new focus cast. But the legacy cast members are famous people in these stories, and so they are mentioned, and their imprint is still present in the story. And in fact, 70,000 years later, when you hit Albert, the novel Albert, these people are still remembered, because it was the golden age of Vidura, where all the amazing science was invented.
Cool. So, do you have a favorite scene that you wrote in the series?
Yes, I do. I have a scene in which, in Quantum Soul, the story in Quantum Soul is that the young man in university is studying physics under Rivan Saraf, who is the main character of the first book, and he reads a monograph by Rivan Saraf's mentor that proposes an architecture for the immortal soul, and so it's rather thin on math, but they're working with transdimensional physics, and so Bishen Parsanda's idea was that the soul is immortal, and that it lives, that the soul resides in another dimension, and that it connects to our biology with quantum entanglement. And so in this theory, this idea, the brain is not a thinking machine, it's a anchor for the immortal soul, so that the spirit, the being behind the spirit, can exist in the linear temporal reality. And so there's your hard science fiction there, because it talks about time, and I'm very careful to use real physics ideas in proposing all of this. But so it creates quite a controversy, because the church, of course, is very excited, right? Because it confirms their doctrine. But the secular, some aspects of the secular community are very unhappy about it. And so the prefect of the Saga, which is the main religious organization on the planet Verdura, is the keynote speaker at the graduation ceremony. And people are holding up signs in the crowd saying, "Teach science, not religion." And so he gives a speech where he talks to those people. He says, "Why are you so upset over our joy? Why do you want to, you know, make this a terrible thing that we finally discovered that the things that we believe, that the soul is real, that the universe is bigger than anyone, and more mysterious and more wonderful than anyone had any right to believe, that all these things might indeed be true." And he says to a man holding up, he picks out a man in the crowd holding up a sign. He says, "Sir, is it your problem that you're jealous because now we seem to be vindicated, and you're not a part of our tribe?" And he says, "You can be part of our tribe. You don't have to pray. You don't have to believe in God. You don't have to do anything except stop being such an asshole." So that was my favorite scene.
Yeah, I can see why that I think a few people in this reality might be benefit from that. Don't be such an asshole.
Yeah, don't be such an asshole. Don't be such a sourpuss. Don't be such a killjoy. Let us have our moment. And so that was my favorite scene.
Okay, so you obviously write sci-fi, and you've got a series still to finish. Are there any other genres you'd like to explore in future when you're done with this, though?
Well, I wrote an adventure love story. It's entitled Silken Thread, and the elevator pitch is: in 1966 Manila, an American teenager courts a CIA officer several years his senior. And I was raised in the Philippines, so it was, as far as doing the scene work, it was not very difficult, because I was raised in the Philippines in the 1950s and 1960s, and I knew all the people in the story. And so there's I wrote it originally as a short story, as an assignment in creative writing class. So after I start writing, I figured I better learn to be a writer. So I went to a couple of university classes as an audit student. And one of the classes, they said, write a short story. So I wrote a 22-page short story, which starts off with something that really happened to me. In 1967, I was at the Hotel New Otani, the Sky restaurant there in Tokyo, with my dad and his Taiwanese business associate, Henry Tang. And Uncle Henry I was 17, and Uncle Henry says, "So, John, you decide what you do when you go college?" And I said, "No, sir, I have not." He says, "I tell you what you do. You learn to speak Chinese while you're still in Manila. The States, become engineer like your father. When you come back, I make you my partner, right?" And so in 1999, when my parents got in trouble with old age and they needed our help and we moved them to be close to us, I asked Dad if he remembered that story. And he said, "Oh, yeah, Henry Tang asked my permission before he spoke to you about it." And I said, "Well, what would have happened if I had said yes?" And he said, "Oh, Henry Tang would have made you a very rich man." And and I said, "Well, you know, what's the deal, Pop?" And he said, "Well, here's the deal: is that Henry was tied in with the Chinese mafia, and not because he was a bad man, but because all the important rich people in Taiwan are tied in with the Chinese mafia, and so he would have." And Henry had one daughter, and so he would have treated you like his own son, and you would have been expected to obey. And he would have married you into an influential family in Taiwan. So the deal is that you have a Chinese wife in Taiwan, you'll have a Filipino mistress in Manila, and you'll have a European mistress in Sydney, Australia, which is where your territory would have been as a sales engineer for his company. And I said, "Well, that really doesn't sound so bad to me, Dad." And he said, "Well, it's not the life I wanted for you." But so I wrote that story and basically ended it with that. And then a lot of people said, "Well, what happens next?" And I said, "Well, I wasn't really intending to write a novel." And but I had a lot of encouragement, so I took off and I wrote the novel. And I decided that what the young man in the story does is he goes and takes Chinese lessons. And I happen to know where the Chinese lessons are taught. They're taught by the CIA at the American Embassy, because we played golf with those guys when I was a kid. So and then what happens when you go to the Chinese language class at the American Embassy in Manila, and you're a teenager, and everybody else is U.S. Marines and Air Force, and they're coming off duty in Vietnam and cycling into the CIA. And who do you meet there? You'll meet a bunch of guys like who coached my Pony League baseball team, tough ass, short haired Marines. And I said, well, there's got to be a love interest here. And so I stuck in a Pentagon Air Force accountant who's coming out of coming out of a job in Washington, D.C. and wants to be a CIA agent. She's 28 years old. And so we have a little forbidden romance here. And so that's what Silk and Thread is about. And so by the time he's 17 and she's 29, they're hooked up. And she's thinking she's going to love him and leave him. And it doesn't turn out that way. They get actually emotionally involved. And so people look at that and they say, well, it's kind of far-fetched. And no, really, gosh, it isn't. Things like that do happen. And I know that, traditionally if somebody's going to be much older than somebody else, it's usually the male is older than the female. But and it's a real problem for young David Aarons to prove to this now 30-year-old woman when he's 18 that he's an acceptable suitor. And that's so that's a lot about what the story is about. But it's an adventure love story, and there's Chinese mafia in it, and CIA intrigue, and it's from somewhat of a more authentic level, because I actually, one of my best friends' dad was in the CIA, and I sat around while those guys played dice and drank scotch and listened to all those stories, and I know what those guys are like and what they did for a living, and it was pretty dull.
Well, I was going to say you might have a thriller in there, but maybe if it's dull, maybe not.
Yeah, it's actually you have to make it seem more exciting than it really actually was, because there was, it was pretty dull. It's not like the movies at all.
Yeah. Okay, so on that note, I think we'll wrap up the interview, and I'd like to thank you for being our guest today. It was very
Well, thank
interesting
you
and
for
an
spending
enjoyable
time with
chat.
me. Yeah, I had a great time. Thanks so much for letting me talk about myself. I'll do it anytime.
Okay, so you can find links to his series and his website in the description of this chat. And we will not be back next week as our guest had to cancel, but we will be back for the rest of March for 3 weeks. But that will be it for the show after March. We're taking a little hiatus, so enjoy the rest of March with the show, and then we'll be off for a while. But we will be back. So I'll have more on that later on in the next few shows. So we'll see you later. Bye for
Bye.
now.
Thank you.